Good evening to everyone, and welcome to our wonderful opportunity to share our last presentation during the month of Women History Month. We are so excited to have Miss Renata Fordyce with us to share her research. Dr. Christopher Rivera will give an in-depth introduction of his former student, who is now a PhD candidate, and I will leave him to have that wonderful pride, as we call them, academic children, and he's just beaming. I'm here to say, on behalf of the Department of Applied Social and Political Science, welcome. Welcome to our last event that is looking at the theme for the year, Valiant Women of the Vote, Refusing to be Silenced. And we are looking at what women have done historically and currently as they continue to push for the advancement of equity, the advancement of inclusion, the advancement of women, gender equality, women's rights, and therefore children and community rights also. And so on behalf of the members of the department, Dr. Hudgens, who is with us, Dr. Rivera, Dr. Kluge, Dr. Drury, Dr. Ahmed Zani, and Dr. Pearl and Miss Johnson, we welcome you to this opportunity to share with us in this evening's event. Although we're celebrating Women's History Month during the month of March, we celebrate women every day of the year. And so, Dr. Rivera, thank you for this opportunity for us to hear from Ms. Renata Fordyce. And I now yield to you and look forward to the presentation. Welcome, Ms. Fordyce, to our campus, to Coppin State University. We are happy that you accepted our invitation, and we look forward to what you will present, and we look forward to your scholarship over the years to come. Dr. Rivera, thank you.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to give you some information about the format for the evening. So you can type in the Q&A at any time during the talk, but the structure will be after I introduce our speaker, then the speaker will speak for approximately 25 minutes, and then there will be respondent panelists. So it'll be Dean O'Brien if time permits, then it will be Dr. Hudgens, and then it will be Dr. Nelson. And then any questions in the Q&A, I'll just be scanning them and going through them and then try to go to them in order that they were received. And then Renata Fordyce will be able to respond to them. Okay, so here's sort of the official introduction now. In the summer of 2015, Renata Fordyce entered my office for registration and advising to complete her associate's degree in Africana Studies. At the time, little did I know I would be meeting one of the smartest people I'd ever met in my professional career, and also a dear, dear friend to grow with in this life. From the beginning, Renata was clear about her academic goals, and I did whatever I could to orient her to the rigors of the academy. Because she is naturally gifted and talented, it did not take long for her to understand and then to succeed in this environment. For example, our individual research projects were accepted for a conference in New York City, and then later we both published articles in a sociology gender studies Routledge publication. I must point out that Renata was, at the time, a sophomore at Essex County College, and her work was accepted at one of the highest ranked international academic publications. I recall we would laugh when the editor's notes to her were sentences like this, and I quote, "Write in a way that would be understandable to undergraduates," end quote, not realizing that Renata herself was actually an undergraduate while writing the piece. After Essex, Renata decided to complete her BA at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. All the while, Renata remained focused on preparing for grad school. As a way to ensure her fully funded acceptance from multiple leading universities, we ended up presenting our various research projects around the world and around the US. While still completing her BA, we presented internationally in countries like Austria, Colombia, and Hungary. Then in the US, we presented our research at NYU, Columbia University, Northeastern University, and at the National Council of Black Studies. I can honestly say that I grew as a scholar because of knowing Renata. Her passion for studying has led to one of our favorite lines we use when we throw personal or professional shade. And here is the line: I could be reading. All jokes aside, I am so proud of all she has already accomplished, and there is so much more to come. Renata is currently a PhD student in the Department of Africana Studies and Research Center at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and she is currently completing her qualifying exams, or as they are known at Cornell, her Q exams. Originally from Guyana, Renata is a force to be reckoned with, and I know there will be so much more greatness that she shares with the world through her teaching and research. Therefore, in celebration of Women's History Month, I am so excited and honored to present you all a really smart woman, Renata Fordyce, and her talk entitled Mythologizing Black Women Voting, Visibility and the Cost of Labor. Thank you so much, Renata.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera, for that very generous, very generous introduction. I appreciate it. And yes, our common refrain is, I could be reading. I'm so honored to be here. And when I heard the theme, I read the theme, Valiant Women of the Vote, Refusing to be Silenced, I thought of what turn would I take, what angle would I go from? And the word silence stood out for me. And I felt like I should underscore that in my presentation. And I was wondering, should I take silence as just historical silence or silence contemporaneously? And how could I do that justice if I want to look at it over a period of time? And of course, I said, I will look at it from a historical perspective and contemporaneously. So, and this is how I ended up with Mythologizing Black women voters. Okay. Oh, wait a minute, my second. Are you able to see my
Yes, we see it.
Are you
in
my
slideshow. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Why isn't it going to slideshow? I'm sorry about that.
Try the icon at the bottom next to the Zoom. It looks like a,
Okay.
Yeah, try that one.
I'll try this. Oh, my apologies. So, so when I thought of the theme, I thought maybe I should start historically and looking at the historicity of Black women and voting rights, whether we're engaging in a microhistory or an exhaustive investigation of universal suffrage. Black women's activism is undeniably pivotal to the success of Black men and all women attaining the right to vote. Despite being relegated to the margins of society by Black men and white women during the 19th and 20th centuries, Black women are fundamental to the passage of the 15th Amendment on February 26, 1869, and the 19th Amendment ratified on February 18, 1920, along with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Black suffragists historically, some of them were Mary Ann Shadd Cary, and she, even though she was critical of the 15th Amendment, she supported it, but was very critical of the fact that women were left out of right to vote. Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, Mary McLeod Bethune, and others. Contemporaneously, and specifically focusing on the 2020 election cycle and the Georgia Senate runoff, we have women such as Stacey Abrams, Latasha Brown, and I will not butcher this sister's name, but use YT Bell and others. But in terms of the Senate runoff and the 2020 election, there was something pivotal that happened in the post-2020 election cycle. Stacey Abrams and Latasha Brown from Black Votes Matter, and YT Bell, who were all engaged in bringing Black women out, whether they were domestic workers or women who didn't vote in the recent elections, but really generated a lot of enthusiasm for Black women to step out and vote to make a difference in the election. But in the post-2020 election cycle, there was a shift that happened in terms of the contemporary suffrages. The women were not necessarily silenced, but were pushed into the forefront and celebrated. But with that celebration, something else occurred. Black women were seen as saviors of American democracy. And this may appear as something that should be celebrated, and that finally Black women are being celebrated for their efforts, for their impact, whether it's in civil rights or whether it's in getting together and having a voice in American democracy. But what is the cost for Black women being the saviors or being deemed the saviors of American democracy? And the reason why I'm asking this question is that Black women, specifically Stacey Abrams, I will focus on Stacey Abrams here instead of women like Latasha Brown and YT Bell, because Stacey Abrams became the face of this. There was a mythologizing and a glorification and a sort of deification of Stacey Abrams that occurred. Stacey Abrams deserves her flowers, as they would say in the common lingo, and she deserves every form of commendation and every form of applause that she received. However, when we check online and we check through the social media platforms, there was this call for Stacey Abrams to be a Marvel character. There was a call for Stacey Abrams to be a superhero. And for example, with the Stephen Nathan on Twitter saying Stacey Abrams is a Marvel character. Give Stacey Abrams a Marvel movie. Stacey Abrams should be the star of the next Marvel movie. And in this particular one, this young woman asked that, well, she suggested that she will tell her children that Stacey Abrams should be Captain America, or she is Captain America. And the response is that Marvel should make this happen. Stacey Abrams should take the place of Captain America. And she says, thank you. What is the cost of saving American democracy? And what does the toll of being a superhero, that status of superhero, have on Black women such as Stacey Abrams? She, I will say, is just a symbol of this. And with some of those, I theorize that some of the costs are that it engages in an erasure of Black women's humanity. And someone may ask, why? Why would I suggest that giving a Black woman superhero status would efface or erase or in some form diminish or replete her of her humanity? If we think of superheroes, for example, let's take Superman. Superman came from Krypton and he had superhero powers. If we look at Batman, Batman was bitten by bats. And if we look at, for example, in the movie Black Panther, he was from Wakanda and there was a special element that made him strong. And when we look at these particular tropes, in the sense that, let me take, for example, Superman coming from Krypton, he's from somewhere else. He's not from Earth, he's not human. And if we look historically in what happened in terms of in the slavery, during colonial slavery, during the Jim Crow era, Black women's humanity was stripped from them. Black women were not seen as humans. Black women were seen as being in collusion with animality. And for that, they were flogged, worked in the fields, and also used as lab rats, to say for lack of a better word, for modern gynecology. And this stripping of humanity, of a Black woman's humanity, when she's given superhero status, there's a threat for that occurring again in the post-2020 election cycle and in the 21st century. The visibility that occurred, it's not a silencing, but a visibility that may silence her humanity, because then it brings Black women into collusion with animality once again, in the sense that Black women become something not of this world, something that is beyond human. And with that, there is the toll, the strong Black woman's trope. There is the toll that it will also take on the modern Black woman. Also, it diminishes the realities or adverse effects of being in a marginalized community. Black women, as a marginalized group, have been called to take on American democracy and to bear it under a weight when they have to fight for their right to exist in their body, fight for the right of Black men to possess their body in a climate where the prevalent dispossession of Black bodies, on whether it's seeing it on the television or seeing it on social media, exists. And also when mortality rate in terms of pregnancy is very high. But when a Black woman is given superhero powers, the question now lies, why do we need to do these things? You were able to save American democracy. You were able to do these things. Are you really struggling? Is pregnancy really, infant mortality death really an issue for Black women? Are Black women really dying at the hands of policemen? And these questions may seem, for many of us, it's not a question, but in a society where, because of the election of because of President Obama being elected into office, we were deemed in a post-racial society, the superhero status is also a threat to the realities and the adverse effects that Black women face as a marginalized group. Also, the incubation of the caretaker trope, where Black women were misinterpolated as subject objects such as the kitchen, the maid, the mammy. When Black women are given the superhero status, this is a modern incubation of the caretaker trope, because Black women, where in America, Black women are a group that have seen many atrocities, many, I should say, harms following them, have also been called to save America during a time when America was saying that Donald Trump was the best option, and another part of America was saying that America needs to be saved now. And Black women were, I'm sorry, there's a message that came up. Black women are allowed to, sorry, I'm distracted. Black women have had to save America because of America's own state. But sorry, there was a message that came on the screen that distracted me. I'm sorry about that. Okay. The caretaker trope, with Black women misinterpreted as a subject object, is also a mammy trope, where Black women have had to take care of white women, their homes, their children, and where they've been, and in terms of as the kitchen, they've had to clean up the mess of others. They've had to sweep up after others. And while I will not try to diminish Black women's activism, I celebrate Black women's activism. I encourage Black women's activism. But my concern is that when the United States as a collective, and sometimes even Black women, are engaging in calling for a superhero status, calling for a status that is not necessarily human, that will also put Black women in collusion with animality, will put Black women in the space of misinterpolated subject object, because now she's not a human, but she's still a human because she's a citizen that votes. She's not human because she attained something that was virtually impossible, turning a red state blue, but yet still she's human because she was able to get together with other women, Black women, and cause them to feel energized and encouraged to vote and feel active. I am for Black women celebrating that other Black women in terms of their activism, especially with the Georgia runoff, and in the future, and in all aspects of civic engagement. However, when Black women's humanity is at stake, when the adverse effects of being in a marginalized group is being diminished, or possibly could be diminished, or there is a modern reproduction of the caretaker, we have to ask ourselves, what is the cause of the superhero status? Is there a way that Black women can still be very active, not be silenced, but stay in the forefront without being called to do extra labor? And when that labor diminishes them, is there a way for that? And when I ask these questions, I think of the possibility of the post-human Black woman. Is there such a thing as a post-human Black woman? And if there is, does that new status / superhero status cause a problem for the contemporary Black woman? Oh, Dr. sorry.
I think. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Dean O'Brien, are you available? I know you had possibly were unaware if you would be available.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Please feel free to ask and respond to Renata Fordyce as you wish.
Miss Renata Fordyce, I must say, you are everything that Dr. Rivera said. That was an outstanding presentation. We thank you for that. And what a phenomenal perspective. I mean, celebration of Black women's activism or Black activism in general for what it is and its authenticity without taking away the reality of what it is. I actually never thought of it in terms of the diminishing the superhero status, diminishing the authenticity of it. That was very wonderful perspective. And I appreciate it and I agree with it. So I would like to ask the question, since we're talking to so many young people, middle-aged people, the college level people, what are ways that you think that they can continue to be authentic in their activism? And how would you say they could help the national response to the non-need for superheroism?
Thank you, Dr. Leslie O'Brien. I appreciate that question. In terms of young people, I would say that they should continue in the footsteps of some of the women that I discussed, and that speaking to each other, making it easier for others to vote, encouraging each other, because when you're part of a marginalized community, you can become very despondent, be disinterested because you feel your voice doesn't count and your voice doesn't matter. But I will suggest that they continue to do this. However, I would also suggest, because young people are very active online, and this push for the superhero status is pervasive online. It's on Twitter, it's on Instagram, it's all over the social media platforms. And I think that young people's voice is very loud online, and they should push back against it, to call out the fact that when marginalized people are called to do the labor, when they are the ones that are part of the group that are being oppressed, it is not just unfair, but it's an other form of oppression. It's compounding that oppression. And I think young people should push back against it. Do not just celebrate it blindly and just feel, because there was a silence. Ida B. Wells and these other women, there were silence. And Sojourner Truth, they were silent. And there was silence during the time when Katie Stanton and the other women, white women, were not allowing Black women to be part of the movement, the face of the movement. But now Black women are a part of the face of the movement, but to still push back and to say, yes, we are doing this. Yes, we have achieved these things, but these things cause these other forms of oppression, and we do not want it. It's not our job to do this, but it's our right, our purpose to engage in civic engagement and to exercise our franchise, but it's not our job to do this.
I'm so glad. If I could just one other thing, Dr. Rivera, follow up on the other point I was going to make was silence no more, and you went right into that. And And I'm so glad you talked about social media, because that is where young people are. And I think that they can make a difference in various ways, but maybe you would like to speak to some of the ways they can be proactive on social media appropriately, and ways, because everyone has a different focus, a different comfort level. Some people can get up and speak, some would prefer to write, some people would prefer. So maybe you could speak to some of the various ways that young people can be proactive and lend to the national voice and speak out against superheroism and authentic activism.
Okay, so during the previous election cycle, I noticed that some people who were not very vocal or not very extroverted online, there's now an online extroversion, not only in person extroversion, but not very extroverted online, did certain things like send out the dates when registration to vote would end, gave certain rules around this is possible in this state, and they did maps and just placed it out rather than saying, do this or do that. There were other ways, such as stating dates registration would end, when registration, which states allow same-day registration, gave a list of organizations that can help women, for example, who had issues with childcare, that who would possibly give free childcare on the day of the election, certain things, without simply stating, this is what I believe in overtly, but to offer various ways of activism that is not so direct.
Thank you so much. And let me just say, on behalf of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences, of which the Department of Applied Social and Political Science is a part, we are so proud of you. We are as proud of you as Dr. Rivera, and we thank you so much for gracing us with your presence today. Thank you, Dr. Rivera.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hudgens, are you ready? Are you available?
I is ready. Thank you, Ms. Fordyce. I think that was a wonderful presentation, and it has definitely sparked some good thinking. It's raising some issues that I think we ought to deal with. And I just want to dwell for a minute on that whole notion of what I think you pick it up on is a denial of Black humanity. And I'm just thinking, you know, if you go back to slavery, there's always been a problem in this country of acknowledging Black people as human beings. Indeed. Simple human beings who hurt, who cry, who triumph, who overcome. But it's always like, you know, we were immune to pain, we were beasts, we were burdens. And now it seems like we're going the other way. And it bothers me in some ways. I like the movie, but it seemed like we thought we had reached a milestone. We finally got a superhero. And the reality is that just existing in this country has been super. The fact that we even still here has been super. So I'm a little concerned about that dehumanization, because I think in many ways it makes it easier to punish, it makes it easier to disregard, it makes it easier to hurt us. I'm thinking, as you were talking about the trial that's going on there with George Floyd, Calvin, I think that's his name, Chauvin. He didn't think the guy was human. I mean, why else would you put your knee on somebody's neck for 9 minutes? He didn't think the guy could die. He's just another beast. He's a mule. He's a thing, okay? And I think that has responded. So that has been what we're seeing. And I think even as we're talking about the elevation of Black women in terms of Georgia, we see white Republicans doing everything they can to destroy the Black vote in Georgia, to neutralize that victory. And even Stacey Abrams, you know, even she's a hero now, but she was wiped out in the governor's race because of the underhanded stuff that they were doing. So I don't want to dwell on the political thing, but I want to ask you, I guess, in another way, to flip that around. What are the kinds of things we need to do to make sure that we preserve, protect, and elevate our humanity? If not for whites, at least for each other.
Thank you, Dr. Hudgens, for that question. Indeed, historically, we've been dehumanized and we've been placed in collusion with animality, and it became the impetus and the white folks saw it as a reason to flog, to experiment, to make us work in fields or even in homes without pay, and to enslave and dispossess dark bodies, even to this day, as you mentioned, with the Officer Chauvin and George Floyd, may he rest in power, and his death. But what can we, when you ask the question, what can we do now that it made me think of all the numerous marches that occurred from civil rights to now. It makes me think of the Black Lives Movement. It makes me think of the online petitions that have been signed. It makes me think of, for example, even at Cornell, renaming departments and students demanding change and demanding things from our department in relation to our humanity, and to where departments and even lanes and streets on the campus celebrated white supremacy and celebrated the dispossession of bodies. And I think of, and because I'm in the academic sphere, I will address that first before addressing what can be done on the ground as somebody outside of the halls of academia. Within academia, there's been the recent, especially within the, whether it's at Rutgers, Princeton, I think Harvard, but particularly Cornell. Cornell is a land grant institution, and it is responsible for one of the largest dispossession of Indigenous people, and it's even pushing out the Black community and the minority community here in Ithaca. And one of the things that the students have been pushing for is, for example, we don't have a Department of English anymore because of the fact that English and the supremacy in the colonialism and imperialism and all that occurred with that, and the dispossession of dark bodies, or the being found as being subhuman, and all of that that's included in the founding of that particular department. Students have pushed, and I would say professors, I don't want to neglect the praises that the professors deserve, pushed for not just the renaming, but how scholarships are handed out, who is admitted into the various classes every year. There was a commission to see Cornell's, or to observe or to check Cornell's involvement in the rape and raiding of the Indigenous community here in Ithaca. They found that Cornell was very, very much culpable, but it ended there. This commission made its discovery, and that was it. Students have been pushing to say we have to do more than just say, okay, we are liable. We have to do more. And there is also a push to be engaged with the community, the marginalized communities here, minority communities here, and to say, you know what, we don't want to be a part of that new form of gentrification, even when we are, as dark bodies, people that are seen as subhuman, but to say, okay, there is a privilege as being a dark body in this space, and not to contribute to that modern form of gentrification and pushing out people. So I think in terms of seeing we as Black people seeing and doing things that promote our humanity, it's not just civil rights, but it's also the simple things, as you have the right to live here because this is your community, when we have that privilege. And I'm speaking in terms of in the halls of academia. In terms of the everyday person, it's difficult. I would not claim to have all of the answers. It's difficult because how many times have we taken out a phone and recorded when someone has been arrested? How many times have we said, like, for example, the MMA fighter during George Floyd's trial, I'm sorry, not the George Floyd, the Chauvin trial, the MMA fighter, he called the police on the police. He said, "You're killing him." He stood up and he spoke up, but still George Floyd's humanity was still not seen. And if I were supposed to give a suggestion towards that, I would say we do not stop. We continue to do what we're doing in that sense. I don't have the complete answers of how we can shift this beyond wherever we are and wherever we can be our humane self, whether we can show love to each other, when those of us who are in privileged positions do not forget who we are, because it's easy sometimes when you come out of a certain situation and you start doing better for yourself to forget yourself. but to remember that African proverb, because of you, I am. And so to maintain our humanity, because we did that even in the face of great oppression, in the face of enslavement, we still maintained our sense of community. We still created communities of care in spite of being flogged, in spite of seeing death, in spite of losing our loved ones. We maintained communities of care even when there were not blood relatives. And I will add this one before I go rhapsodizing on and on. I was doing some research on slave narratives, and I was in the archives, and I found that when during enslavement, one of the things that that the slave holders and the slave owners did, they would separate enslaved people. We know this, yes. They would separate enslaved people from their loved ones. But as a form of protest for those who didn't run away, often we hear the glorious stories of those who ran away to safety and ran away to freedom. But the stories of those that didn't run away, but created communities of care for each other, their form of protest was to, in spite of the disenfranchisement, the enslavement, they formed communities of care. They took care of each other. They formed families that there were these, what they call like tender points for each other. And they formed bonds with non-blood relatives and people that they're considered family. And they created these little communities right there in spite of all of that. And I think we should continue to do that. We should continue our activism. We should continue speaking out. Those of us who have the privilege to do certain things, do that. But don't forget to remain as a family, that we should continue to care for each other. I remember that because of you, I am.
I just want to follow with just another piece. I'm almost reluctant to do this after such a wonderful answer to that question,
Sure.
but I have to be me. So I'm reminded of the play many years ago, The Myth of the Superwoman. And one of the things that also focused on was how we unnecessarily, I guess that's the right word, also placed the burden on Black women. That is Black folk, particularly Black men, but folks within the Black community, that we almost treated Black women as though they were, we weren't saying inhuman, but that they were carrying all these burdens, that they could carry everything. I'm thinking of the whole notion of female-headed households, how we kind of almost made that a Black thing. And it's almost the notion that helping somebody get pregnant is all a man needs to do and walk away, because she can handle it by herself. She can do all these things. And that whole play was geared toward the fact that I'm not a superwoman, I'm just a human being. And how do we begin talking about getting rid of that myth? I mean, there's one thing to talk about the superhero that we're talking about now, but there's also kind of an attitude in our communities is that, you know, well, Black women can handle anything, okay? And therefore, in some ways, the rest of us are kind of off the hook. I don't know if you're getting that, but that side of it is also, I think, a piece of what you're saying, and it's certainly a piece of dehumanizing Black women. I don't think it's hostile in the same sense as racism, but it is a kind of way of expecting the person to be superhuman again.
Yes, I do agree. I guess I was hinting towards that in part of the threat for the superhero status. It's the strong Black woman trope, and that the Black woman constantly carries this burden of taking care of everyone, even the Black man, and having to deal with the fact that whether she's just marginalized. And if we look even within the civil rights movement and where Black women were positioned in that movement, and in terms of the Black Panther movement, and how these very, as they would say now, woke men, these revolutionary men, the way they treated Black women. Mm-hmm. And I should say now, one of the things that we have to do as Black women, speaking for myself here, not to you, Dr. Hudgens, as Black women, we have to push back against it, because sometimes Black women have also internalized some of the narratives and taken on, like, yes, I'm a strong Black woman, and it's okay. Yes, when I say communities of care and forming these communities of care, I'm also calling on Black men to be engaged in this, so that there's reciprocity. That as much as I take care of you, you take care of me. And as much as I want to unburden you, you help unburden me, because when we go out there, we are seen as everything but ourselves. We're seen as everything but human. We're seen as everything but our wonderful, beautiful selves. And so when we get together in those communities, and it does not, like I said, have to be blood relatives, or it does not have to be husband and wife, but it also can be whether it's a friend or your neighbor or a stranger. There are sometimes when a stranger can be that for you, but remembering that Black women should not carry all of it, because it is a second form of oppression when Black women have to take it all on to themselves and carry that strong Black woman trope. And I think it's oppressive. And I agree with you, Dr. Hudgens.
Thank you so much. Those are wonderful answers, and Godspeed to you. Proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Nelson, thank you.
Excellent, Ms. Fordyce. I am excited to be able to have this opportunity to engage in some thoughts with you, because this is my area. I love the fact that you presented, and you presented so well. And what I mean by so well, that it is steeped in research. The connections that you've made between our foremothers and the women on the ground today in the work that they're doing speaks to the continuation and a never-ending struggle. And you talked about saving democracy. And in the face of it all, every generation is dealing with this notion of how do they fit in to broaden the seas, to have more people to be included in the democracy and have fair entry into it and access. And so when you talked about Georgia, which is another, and that's why probably Dr. Rivera, that's why he said he wanted me to be on this panel, because I'm here in Georgia. I'm one of those women that voted. I'm in a community of women that got out there and got the vote. I'm a member of a chapter that have 900 Black women in it here in Georgia, in the work that we're doing, and understanding that notion of when success happened, how you described it, the celebration of Black women as savior of American democracy, and that these women are allowed to be visible and have a voice. And the women that you looked at in terms of Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, who I love because she had the let us convene, the call, let us get together, Ida B. Wells. I want to understand how you came to the notion that those earlier women were silenced in that way because they were very vocal. Ida B. Wells, the princess of the press, right? Using the mechanisms that they could find to be vocal, but still be in silence. So how do you reconcile the two with this notion of them being silenced, but they still had a voice? They convened, they created the first national Black women's organization. So I'm interested in your perspective on that dichotomy of silence.
Sure, I will start contemporaneously to give a contemporary example and then go backwards. For example, if we look at the 2018 gubernatorial race for Stacey Abrams against Brian Kemp, and what occurred in terms of what Kemp did in terms of purging those voters lists, that was a form of silencing. Stacey was very out and upfront. She was on MSNBC, CNN, she was on ABC, she was everywhere. But there was a silencing that occurs. Silencing does not mean just the absolute absence of sound. So silencing takes on various forms. And that, for example, is one of the silences that I refer to. And that was a contemporary example, going back towards the historical time and using our foremothers. If we look at what was happening during that time, white women were seen as the forefront. They did not want to include Black women. There was a silencing there. They didn't want to include Black women into that. Black women found avenues. We have always found ways to be heard. Even when the mic was off, we found tins or created holes and we spoke through them. We created our own bullhorn. So I'm not saying that those women didn't have agency, those women didn't find ways to be heard, but there was a systemic or systematic silencing that was occurring, but they spoke above that. They created ways to have their voices heard.
Excellent. Thank you. Because it is ingenuity, right? It is making a way out of no way, finding the space to be relevant, but to also have a space to create change and be a change agent. And I looked at what you were speaking about, and two phrases came together for me as one. And so you asked, what is the cost? And I wanted to make it a little more, what is the cost of cleaning up other people's mess? Because that's what you said about kitchen. And that just captured because that is visual, because we can all understand a mess, right? And particularly when it's not your mess and you have to clean it up, and what you feel about it, what you're saying when you're going through this mess, and why did they have to do this? And and so we can all internalize and understand mess. So the mess of America, right? This whole mess of the messiness of democracy that was not created for everyone, but for a select few. That's a mess. And so you have this engine of a perceived representative democracy, and people are trying to always open it up, widen it up through various ways. And so you mentioned Stacey Abrams as having had that opportunity to help clean up the mess, because you're talking about the 2020 runoff for the Senate. And then all of these people are looking at her as this superhero. Therefore, this whole idea of she has been able to be vocal. As you continue with this research, are you following the silencing of Stacey Abrams now through our legislative process here in Georgia? And not just Stacey Abrams, but all other people of color or young people who made a difference, clearly changing Georgia from red to blue, and how forces have come out and now trying to silence. So that's my question to you.
Yes, I am following it. And one of the things that I've noticed in terms of American history is that every time that there have been gains in terms of minorities, there's been this extra pressure that comes afterwards, as if this should not happen, as if we need to fix this right. Not this, and it's seen as it is seen as a wrong, but we need to fix this right. Not, of course, from the minority community. And I almost, and I hate to say that, I almost expected that there was going to be a pushback for what happened in terms of the red state turning blue. And it's this impossible, because they didn't think it would happen, not this time, even though people were predicting Texas first before Georgia, and people were predicting that if Georgia should ever turn blue, it will be way down the line, and Black women came and did this. And when I used Stacey Abrams, I'm not using Stacey Abrams just as the person, but a figure, because that's what she has become, a figure, a symbol of Black women and the minority community coming out to make a difference. And I am following it in terms of the new voter registration laws, and no food allowed at the polling station. And I was one of those women that were that was sending out, okay, this is the number, this is where you can call on Instagram, letting people know where they can get food, in terms of, if you stay in line, if you're in line, stay in line. And that really made a difference, because if you're hot, hungry, thirsty, people who may feel the need to leave, and by the time they leave and they come back, the polls are closed. And I even though I was not in Georgia or not in certain states that allowed it, I was also online letting people know that who are following me on Instagram, to let them know that this is what you can do if you're in these states, and these are the numbers, and this is what you can do. So I knew, and I got DMs afterwards like, oh, thank you, people sending messages. So I knew it was impactful, and I knew that by purging, not just requiring, not just saying that we cannot allow people to have food, that collectively this is an effort to impede, to prevent Black women and minorities from coming out to vote. And I don't think that we should just say, okay, you know what, this happened, and say, woe is me, poetry, but continue to push against it. We've always, whenever legislations have come up that try to disenfranchise minorities, whether legislations have come up to prevent us from experiencing a full citizenship, we've continuously fought against it, and we found ways. And I think we will, if we are, and I hate to say this is labor again, but Black women have not stopped being activists, and the Black community will not stop its activism. And yes, I am following it, and I believe that we should continue to fight against it. It's not the end of it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And I will close by answering your question that you asked us in your presentation about, you know, how can we deal with this issue of making Black women superheroes, right? And then those subsequent burdens that come from that. And I would have to say that we can learn from Black women how they do that, because we teach our children that people will always have opinions about you, right? And so in one camp, you will have people saying that this is a superhero, and in the other camp, you'll have people diminishing the work of that person. But if you are focused on the purpose individually and collectively, right, and not be in any way taken off the path of the goal, or you take your eye off the focus and not be swayed, then people will always put you in a bucket. So it's hard to say what can you do about that, but what you can do is the response to that. And I think many women have shown us that you continue to do exactly what you just said. Black women continue to be activists. They continue to be moving forward. They continue to do the work that's needed for their communities, for their families, for the things that are important to them. And then they pass the baton from a person like myself to you. So thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. And you're in Africana Studies. My master's is African American Studies, and so I love you because we need to make sure that we still have people who are learning the history and using that to speak to the socioeconomic, political day in which they live in, but connect their generation to the historical context, so that they know that nothing happens in a vacuum. So I thank you. And Dr. Rivera will definitely keep us updated on your progress towards earning that much deserved honor, so that we can come back and call you Dr. Renata Fordyce. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Rivera, thank you.
Renata, would you like to respond?
Oh, I thought you had questions from the from the audience. Oh, it has been my esteemed pleasure and such an honor to be among you guys. It's such a wonderful group, not just as scholars. I can tell from the radiance and how resplendent your personalities are, and the questions, such generative conversation. I am absolutely honored, and I am very thrilled to share it with you today. And thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Very good. Now we want to open it to see if any audience questions. I'll read some comments. There was a student or an individual who wrote 2 comments. So, but I think from what I read, I think maybe if you could just clarify subhumanity as a theoretical concept, maybe that caused some confusion. So could you talk a little bit about what you mean by being considered subhuman in a historical sense for our listeners?
Sure. In terms of being considered subhuman, sub being subpar, like sub as in being less than human, not quite human, not fully human, not yet human. And with that, one can be seen as within the archives, they have things like writing in enslaved people as the same price of a hoe or the same price of a garden tool, not human. You're not considered a person, and thus you don't have the right to your body. You don't have the right to have agency or thoughts or to do anything. So when you're beneath a human being, it gives individuals, whether it's in the historical context, especially during colonization, and even in the post-slavery, post-chattel slavery era, where Black people were seen as 1/5 of human. In the Dred Scott case, where the Supreme Court justice says that he has no right to even think of a Black man in this perspective, a Black person, but obviously not even seen as a Black person, not fully human, 3/5 of a human being, subhuman.
And then just connecting that with your topic in general. And I just love language and concepts of opposites. So the subhuman and then super or supra, you know, so how do you put that together, or what do you have to say about that?
Okay, to draw the connections between that historical context to what I'm discussing today, is that even with the superhero status, because the superhero, as I used the example of Superman being from Krypton and not from this world, he's not considered, because who lives here as inhabitants of this planet, Earth? Human beings. So if Superman and that superpower, even Wakanda is not Earth, and Batman, who was human, was bitten by a bat, an animal, and of course, contemporaneously, that means that you're in collusion with animality. You're not human, and so super. Even though that you're now super, seeming as if you've superseded the human, you're still being robbed of your humanity because now you're in collusion with animality, or you do not belong here. You do not have rights here.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to interact with you, and I'm so glad that my colleagues and my new community was able to get to know you and get to see your brain in action. I am so very proud of you, and it was such a lovely educational moment, and I already told you I will be teaching this for years to come. So thank you all very much for participating. Let me see, there is a message down here. I just want to read it. Brittany Davis Jackson. Thank you, Brittany. She's one of my IDS team majors. Thank you for presenting to us. You have encouraged me to be true to my platform and confirmed my role as a woman. Would you like to respond, Renata?
Sorry, let me read that again. Oh, that is so lovely. I'm sorry. I'm moved by that statement. That is such a high honor to bestow upon me. Thank you very much. I'm very happy and enthused that you feel encouraged, and of course, continue to pursue your platform and to stand firm in that. And of course, even as you stand firm, give yourself room to grow, because anything that stands too firm without having some kind of fluidity breaks and snaps in the wind. So stay grounded, but have locomotion.
And on that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. This has been a lovely experience, highly intellectual, highly enjoyable. And I want to thank my department and the school and everyone. Thank you so much. Also, Kelly and Harper for being part and making this come together. Thank you guys so much. Have a great evening.
May I say one thing? Thank you so much for the IT department at Kaufman. You guys are amazing. They've been so patient. They've been so helpful. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Have a great evening, guys.
Thank you, and you are welcome back anytime.
Here, here.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.